I could feel the anger boiling inside me as I listened to the lewd sounds coming through Brent's phone speaker. My husband's deep, throaty groans intermingled with the unmistakable high-pitched gasps of a woman who definitely wasn't me. "Oh, Brent, you feel so good," the woman purred, her voice dripping with lust. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, but I forced myself to remain still and silent, clutching the device tightly as waves of nausea washed over me. When the call finally ended, I took a deep, shuddering breath, fighting back tears. How could he do this to me, to our family? After 15 years of marriage and giving him everything, this was how he repaid my devotion? The lies, the business trips, the unexplained credit card charges, it all made sense now. My heart pounded with a mixture of rage and devastation as I confronted the harsh reality. Brent was having an affair. I spent the rest of that night pacing restlessly, my mind racing as I replayed the sordid conversation over and over. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and hurl accusations. But the other part knew I needed to stay calm, to gather evidence before he inevitably denied everything. When Brent finally returned home 2 days later, I steeled myself, forcing a tight-lipped smile as he bounded through the door with his usual charisma. "Hey, babe, I missed you." He pulled me into an embrace, his aftershave filling my nostrils and making me gag silently. I returned the hug stiffly, all the while imagining wrapping my hands around his lying throat and squeezing until his deceptive tongue lolled out. "Everything okay?" he asked, sensing my tension. His concerned facade only fueled my fury. "Just tired?" I lied smoothly, mirroring the ease with which he'd clearly been deceiving me. "Welcome home." As he headed upstairs to shower, I felt a surge of resolve coursing through me. I would uncover every sordid detail of Brent's betrayal. And when I did, he would face the consequences, severe, brutal consequences, for shattering the sacred vows he had sworn to me. Brent's carefree whistling echoed down the stairwell, but I heard only the faint rumblings of karma's approach, slowly gathering like an inescapable storm on the horizon. I took a deep breath and steeled myself before entering the living room. Phone in hand with the damning recording queued up, Brent was lounging on the couch, idly flipping through channels. "We need to talk," I stated firmly. He glanced up with a bemused expression. "What's up, babe?" Rather than answering, I hit play on the audio file. The unmistakable sounds of his aroused groans and the mystery woman's breathy moans filled the air. Brent's face drained of color as the recording played. When it finished, I fixed him with a cold stare. "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" He opened and closed his mouth wordlessly for a moment, before regaining his composure. "Candace, that was just a stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that was a one-time slip-up?" Brent rose from the couch, hands raised placatingly. "Baby, I swear, it was nothing but a drunken fling during that conference in Phoenix. It'll never happen again." "Don't lie to me," I shouted, nostrils flaring. "I know about the hotel receipts, the suspicious credit card charges. How long has this been going on?" He shook his head vehemently. "No, you've got it all wrong." "Save it," I cut him off, feeling disgusted. "I can't even look at you right now." Turning on my heel, I stormed out of the room, slamming the door to the guest bedroom behind me. I collapsed onto the bed, hot tears of anger and humiliation streaming down my cheeks. How dare he try to gaslight me, to make me feel crazy for catching him red-handed? My body shook with rage at the thought of all the lies, all the times he had smiled in my face while carrying on a tawdry affair behind my back. But I refused to be the victim anymore. I would expose Brent for the unfaithful snake that he was, gathering undeniable proof to shove in his smug face. Over the next few weeks, I documented everything, poring over bank statements, installing tracking software on his phone and computer, even hiring a private investigator to follow his movements. The evidence mounted rapidly. Hotel receipts, incriminating emails and texts, even video footage of him kissing and groping the woman, who I learned was his co-worker Amber, in a dimly lit parking garage. When I finally amassed the extensive file, I waited until Brent was home from another one of his frequent business trips. Dylan was spending the night at a friend's, giving us privacy. "We're through," I stated coldly, tossing the thick manila envelope onto the coffee table in front of Brent. "I know everything." His eyes went wide as he flipped through the photos, videos, documents, and other proof within. Candace, I can explain. I held up a hand, silencing him. Save your breath. The lies stop now. For the first time, Brent seemed to realize I wasn't bluffing or exaggerating. The smug mask slipped, revealing the cowering coward underneath. What are you going to do? He asked meekly. A vindictive smile crossed my lips as I leaned back in my chair. Don't you worry, I purred darkly. You're about to face some severe consequences. Despite the mountain of evidence I had gathered proving his infidelity, Brent continued to deny and downplay his affair with Amber. Lie after shameless lie poured from his mouth as he desperately tried to gaslight me into doubting the truth right in front of my eyes. It was just a fling, a stupid mistake, he would claim, as if that absolved him of betraying his marriage vows. Other times he would insist, we're just friends. There's nothing going on. I wanted to scream at the blatant falsehoods. How dare he treat me like an imbecile after I had caught him red-handed? Part of me was tempted to leak the evidence online for the world to see, to utterly humiliate him. But I held back, knowing I needed to bide my time for the perfect moment to strike. In the meantime, I began compiling an even more extensive file on Brent's misdeeds. I installed hidden cameras and microphones around the house, recording his every move. Our teenage son Dylan even helped, using his tech skills to hack into Brent's emails and messaging apps. I can't believe Dad would do this, Dylan said sadly one day after uncovering yet another explicit exchange between Brent and his mistress. I pulled my son into a tight hug, my heart breaking for the disillusionment he was experiencing at such a young age. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way, I told him gently. But we can't let your father's lies tear this family apart. We have to fight back. Dylan nodded resolutely. Don't worry, Mom. We're going to take that cheating scumbag down. With my son's help, the file on Brent's indiscretions grew thicker by the day. Incriminating photos, videos, emails, credit card statements, we collected it all, documenting his every transgression in preparation to obliterate his life. But still, Brent persisted in lying through his teeth whenever I confronted him, doubling down on his fabrications with almost sociopathic ease. You're being paranoid and crazy, he would snap whenever I tried to reason with him. There's no one else, you're imagining things. The gaslighting was maddening, making me question my own sanity at times despite the overwhelming proof I possessed. How could someone I had loved and trusted for so long deceive me so callously? The final straw came at Brent's family reunion over 4th of July weekend. As we mingled with his relatives at the backyard barbecue, I watched in horrified disgust as he blatantly flirted with Amber right in front of me, his wandering hands leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Rage boiled in my veins as I stormed over and shoved him away from the smirking woman. Get your hands off my husband, you home-wrecking whore, I shouted, the vicious words ripping from my throat before I could stop them. Brent tried to defuse the situation, laughing it off as a misunderstanding to his oblivious family members. But I was done playing his game. Grabbing the thick file from my purse, I flung it down on the picnic table, photos and documents spilling out, displaying the lurid evidence for all to see. Take a good look, everyone, I spat venomously, whirling on my astonished in-laws. This is the kind of man your son really is, a lying, cheating scumbag who's been having an affair with this woman for over a year. Pandemonium erupted as Brent's relatives gasped and shouted in shock and anger. But I didn't care. I was past the point of protecting him or preserving his pristine reputation. He had made his bed, and now it was time to lie in it, no matter how publicly humiliating the consequences would be. The backyard erupted into chaos as I exposed Brent's sordid affair to his entire family. His parents and siblings recoiled in shock and disgust, gawking at the incriminating photos and documents strewn across the picnic table. How could you, Brent? His mother wailed, burying her face in her hands. After everything your father and I did for you. Brent's dad shook his head slowly, a look of utter revulsion on his weathered face. You're a disgrace, son. I didn't raise you to be this kind of man. But Brent didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He simply sneered at me with contempt blazing in his eyes. You crazy bitch, he snarled, spit flying from his lips. You're going to regret this. Before anyone could react, he lunged across the table and grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking me towards him until our faces were mere inches apart. The stench of beer and barbecue sauce wafted from his mouth as he hissed, "You think you've won? This isn't over." I stared defiantly into his crazed eyes, refusing to show fear despite my heart thundering in my chest. "I'm done with your lies, Brent. Our marriage is over, and so are you." Dylan suddenly appeared, shoving his father away from me with surprising force. "Get your hands off her!" he shouted, positioning himself protectively in front of me. Brent stumbled backwards, nearly toppling the table with the evidence in his drunken rage. Amber was at his side in an instant, clinging to his arm. "Come on, baby, let's get out of here," she crooned, shooting me a smug look over her shoulder. A chorus of outraged shouts and insults followed them as they stormed away. Brent's brother Chris stepped towards me, shaking his head in disbelief. "I'm so sorry, Candace," he murmured, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "If we had known, this is unforgivable." I nodded mutely, fighting back tears as the gravity of the situation hit me. My life as I knew it was over, but it was a life built on lies and deceit anyway. As much as it hurt, I knew I was doing the right thing. In the days that followed, the rest of Brent's family reached out in turn to express their shock and lend their support. Even his own parents, initially defensive of their son, came to realize the extent of his betrayal as they pored over the damning proof I had gathered. "We had no idea he was capable of such depravity," Brent's mother told me, her voice laced with a heartbroken waver. "You didn't deserve any of this." I accepted their apologies stoically, appreciative of their kindness, yet numb to offering any absolution for Brent's actions. As far as I was concerned, he had committed the ultimate sin by breaking his sacred vows, and he would pay dearly for it. True to his vile nature, Brent remained utterly unrepentant in the aftermath of his exposure, attempting to gaslight and manipulate me into doubting the truth yet again. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," he claimed during one heated argument, his arrogance infuriating. "It was just a fling, it's not that serious." I could barely contain my fury as I hurled his words back in his face. "Not that serious? You disrespected me, your family, our entire marriage vows, all for some cheap fling with a woman you couldn't even be faithful to." Brent's eyes narrowed to slits as he stepped towards me, his body tensed with menace. "You'll regret this," he growled, each word dripping with venom. "I'm going to make you suffer for humiliating me like this." But I refused to be intimidated by his empty threats any longer. I had the truth on my side now, along with his own flesh and blood, who had disowned him for his disgusting misdeeds. "No, Brent," I replied coldly, staring him down with flinching. "The only one suffering will be you. I'm going to destroy every single part of your pathetic life, and I'm going to make sure you deserve every agonizing second of it." After the explosive confrontation at Brent's family reunion, there was no going back. The bridges had been burned, the truth laid bare for all to see. His parents disowned him, his siblings wanted nothing to do with him, even his own flesh and blood had turned their backs in utter disgust. But Brent didn't seem fazed by the fallout. If anything, he seemed to revel in the chaos, lashing out with bitter vitriol and doubling down on his reprehensible behavior. "They're all a bunch of self-righteous hypocrites," he sneered when I informed him that his parents were cutting him off financially. "I don't need their money or their fake love." His callousness was appalling, devoid of any remorse for the devastation he had wrought. It became increasingly clear that appealing to his humanity was a fruitless endeavor. He simply had none left. As the divorce proceedings began, Brent fought me viciously on every front, determined to make me suffer, even as the world crumbled around him. He drained our joint accounts, attempted to hide assets, and even leveled false accusations in an effort to turn our son Dylan against me. "Your mother's a lying, vindictive snake," he hissed, after I caught him trying to manipulate Dylan. "Don't let her turn you against your own father." But Dylan wasn't having any of it. Now 17, he had witnessed firsthand the depths of Brent's depravity and betrayal. If anything, it had strengthened the bond between my son and I, a united front against his father's toxic influence. "I don't know who you are anymore, Dad," Dylan said sadly, shaking his head. "But I want no part of this ugliness. With each despicable act, each pathetic attempt to drag us all down with him, my rage toward Brent calcified into an icy, simmering hatred. I found myself obsessively strategizing, plotting out every move to obliterate him, financially, socially, psychologically. It became my singular driving force, a all-consuming quest to make him feel even an ounce of the pain and humiliation he had inflicted upon me and our family. Brent's smug arrogance would be his undoing. I would savor every moment of stripping that away as he lost everything. When the judge ultimately ruled in my favor, awarding me the house and primary custody of Dylan, Brent remained defiant, even as his life crumbled around him. "This isn't over, you psychotic bitch," he snarled, spittle flying as he was led away by the bailiffs. "I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me." His threats might have once filled me with dread, but now I simply laughed in his bloated, twisted face. "Regret?" I called out mockingly. "I'm just getting started, Brent. This is only the beginning of what you deserve." And I meant every word. Exposing his lies and driving away his family and friends was just the opening salvo. I had so much more in store for the man who had so callously shattered the sacred vows between us. As I watched him being dragged away, I felt a savage sense of satisfaction, of karma being served, however cruelly. This was precisely what he deserved after the turmoil and devastation he had wrought with his selfish actions. Turning away, I wrapped an arm around Dylan's shoulders, the two of us standing united against the storm Brent had unleashed through his sins. There would be no remorse, no looking back. Only the total and complete obliteration of the man who had dared to betray our family's trust in the most unforgivable way. Whatever revenge lay ahead, he had more than earned every agonizing second of it. With the divorce finalized and Brent out of our home, I could finally turn my full attention to systematically dismantling every aspect of his miserable life. He thought he had been through hell already? He had no idea what fresh agonies awaited him. My first target was his career at the prestigious corporate firm where he had been employed for over a decade. Brent had always taken immense pride in his position and paycheck, lording his success over others as proof of his importance. Well, it was time to strip that arrogance away once and for all. Utilizing the evidence I had gathered of his affair with Amber, I compiled a comprehensive file documenting how he had been neglecting his duties and misusing company resources to facilitate his indiscretions. Explicit photos, video recordings, emails, all of it, tallying up the sordid details of his unprofessional conduct. I also enlisted the aid of an old friend, a skilled hacker who owed me a favor, to covertly access the company's internal communications and HR files. With his help, I was able to insert the incriminating dossier directly into their systems, ensuring it would be found. Within a week, the firm's CEO himself was calling Brent into his office, the file of evidence splayed out on the desk between them. "What is the meaning of this, Brent?" The CEO's voice could be heard saying sternly over the recording I had my hacker obtain. "This is utterly unacceptable behavior for one of our senior executives. Sir, I can explain." Brent stuttered, suddenly sounding very small. "Explain what?" the CEO interrupted sharply. "These photos, videos, all this proof of you carrying on illicit affairs and neglecting your responsibilities, using company property for your indecent trysts?" There was a pause, and I could practically see Brent squirming in discomfort. Good. Let him feel just an ounce of the shame and humiliation he deserved. "You're fired, effective immediately," the CEO stated, his voice laced with finality and disgust. "Security will escort you off the premises. I want you gone within the hour." The recording clicked off, and I felt a savage surge of satisfaction. That high-paying job, that status and sense of self-worth Brent derived from his career, all of it gone in an instant because of his own reprehensible actions. But I wasn't done by any means. No, this was just the start of his downfall. Next, I recruited Dylan's help to release the entire file across Brent's social media accounts and professional networking sites like LinkedIn. Within hours, the lurid details of his infidelity went viral as outraged friends, family, and colleagues shared and reacted in shock and horror. Amber's husband even reached out, thanking me profusely after discovering the truth about his wife's tawdry dalliances. Their divorce proceedings began immediately. As for Brent, His phone was blowing up constantly with anguished texts and voice messages from all corners of his life. Parents disowning him, friends cutting ties, colleagues aghast at his indecent behavior. In one particularly satisfying instance, I patched his mother's tearful tirade onto the house speakers so we could both savor every blistering second of it. "You were my pride and joy," the woman wept brokenly. "But now, you're nothing to me, nothing but a filthy, immoral disappointment." I could see it all clicking into place for Brent in that moment, the total and complete ruination I had meticulously orchestrated. His entire world was crumbling into ashes before his very eyes. When he finally looked up at me with naked fear and loathing, I simply smiled. "Like I told you before," I said calmly, "this is only the beginning of what you deserve." With Brent's career, reputation, and family ties in ruins, I turned my sights to obliterating what little he had left, his finances and assets. He would be left with nothing, forced to start from less than zero after the hell I put him through. It began with liquidating our joint accounts and investment portfolios that I had access to through our marriage. Hundreds of thousands of dollars drained in a matter of days, transferred discreetly to offshore holdings where he could never trace it. "What did you do?" Brent demanded frantically when he realized our nest egg was gone. "Where's all our money?" I simply smiled placidly. "Considering how I earned every penny of that while you were gallivanting with your whores, I'd say it's finders keepers." His face purpled with rage, but I was prepared for his outburst. With a flick of my wrist, I produced a crisp manila envelope, a dossier detailing every single asset in his name that I intended to systematically demolish. "This is just a taste of what's coming for you," I said coolly. "You're going to lose it all by the time I'm through." True to my word, I deployed every underhanded tactic in the book to unravel the few holdings Brent had managed to siphon away and hide from me. With Dylan's tech-savvy assistance, we relentlessly hacked and probed until we discovered every last possession he tried to salt away. The classic '68 Mustang he had lovingly restored? Reported as a stolen vehicle until it was seized. The private investment funds he had stashed overseas? Drained away by my hacker contacts until not a cent remained. Even the house he tried to rent after being forced from our marital home. I made sure the landlord received an anonymous tip that Brent was an adulterer of the worst kind. He was kicked out within a month. With each successive blow I landed, stripping away his assets and driving him towards bankruptcy, the fight seemed to gradually drain from Brent's body. What was once a sneering, arrogant puffery became a hunched, haggard shell of a man. He would call or text me at all hours, devolving from bitter threats to pathetic pleadings as his life crumbled around him. "Candace, please?" He sobbed one night during a tear-filled voicemail. "I'm so sorry for what I did. You have to stop this. I have nothing left. I'll be destitute." I listened to the message impassively before deleting it without a shred of remorse. Brent's suffering was a calculated, perfectly engineered campaign, and it was nowhere near finished. When his car was finally repossessed and his cell phone cut off for lack of payment, he started showing up at my doorstep, begging to be let inside. "I have nowhere to go," he wailed, pounding on the door with gnarly fists. "You've taken everything from me. Why are you doing this?" I watched him through the security camera, taking perverse satisfaction in his total and complete debasement. This was the great Brent Connors, the corporate hotshot and arrogant cheater, reduced to a sniveling, desperate husk. When Dylan emerged from his room to see what the commotion was, I waved him off. "Don't bother," I told my son calmly. "He's just reaping what he's sown. That's all." My final salvo came in the form of a massive data dump to the IRS. Records upon records of Brent's financial misdeeds, from tax evasion to money laundering. Within days, the authorities were at his ramshackle motel room with warrants and cuffs. The sight of his utter humiliation as they hauled him away almost made the entire grueling process worth it. Almost. Months passed as the full weight of my revenge campaign against Brent took hold. With each day that went by, he plummeted further into the abyss of destitution and ruin I had meticulously constructed. The corporate job, the money, the family, the home, it had all been systematically stripped away through my calculated efforts. Even his freedom was temporarily revoked after that IRS raid, though his high-priced lawyers managed to get the charges reduced to a slap on the wrist. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Brent was a shell of his former arrogant self, having lost every single thing that had once brought him swagger and self-worth. I savored every agonizing second as the proud, selfish man who had so callously shattered his marriage vows was ground down into broken submission. This was karma's bitter reward for his sins against me and our family. Dylan and I, meanwhile, were finally able to start fresh without the toxic weight of Brent's betrayal dragging us down. With my revenge complete and his own misdeeds having alienated him from everyone he knew, he was officially expunged from our lives like the cancer he was. We moved from our old home into a new place, a clean slate for just the two of us to begin rebuilding. Dylan seemed to thrive without his father's negative influence, excelling in school and landing a prestigious internship in software engineering. As for me, I had never felt more liberated and vindicated. The rage that had fueled my quest for vengeance had burned itself out, leaving only a sense of tranquility and peace in its wake. That is, until the incessant phone calls and unwanted visits began. At first, Brent's attempts to reach out were easy enough to ignore. Drunken voicemails pleading for mercy or hurling bitter curses that he had brought upon himself. I would simply delete the messages without a second thought. But then he started showing up in person, loitering outside our new home or accosting us in public with his disheveled, haunted appearance. Each time I saw that sunken, desperate look in his rheumy eyes, any lingering pity I might have felt quickly evaporated. "I have nothing left because of you," he sobbed during one such confrontation outside the grocery store. "You've destroyed me completely." Grabbing my arm with shocking force, Brent stared at me with an almost feral desperation. "Please, give me another chance," he begged hoarsely. "I'll do anything, Candace. Anything to get my life back." I could feel Dylan tense beside me, ready to intervene, but I simply wrenched my arm free of Brent's grasp and stared at him with utter contempt. "Your life?" I spat out a bitter laugh. "This is exactly what you deserve after throwing away the life we had for some cheap fling. You did this to yourself." Brent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off with a savage glare. "I gave you chance after chance to come clean, to make things right," I said, voice low and laced with venom. "But you just couldn't stop lying and cheating, could you? You chose this path, and I made sure you suffered every agonizing step of the way." Straightening up, I turned and began walking back towards the car where Dylan waited, leaving Brent crumpled on the sidewalk like the pathetic, broken shell of a man he had become. As we drove off, I felt an immense weight finally lift from my shoulders. The long, arduous road towards justice and reclaiming my life had finally reached its conclusion. Brent was neutralized, relegated to a cautionary tale of how swiftly karma can dismantle even the proudest of narcissists. I looked over at Dylan, my strong, resilient son, and smiled. We had each other, and that was enough to forge ahead into our new chapter, free of Brent's toxicity at long last. No more looking back, only moving forward, towards the fresh start this long-overdue vengeance had afforded us. My name is Emily Harrison. At 35, I've carved out a life balancing being a mother to a vibrant 5-year-old son and working in the business my parents built from scratch. My husband, Daniel, had always been the pillar I leaned on, or so I thought. I still remember the evening that shattered everything. We were at dinner, the clinking of cutlery mingling with our son's laughter. That's when Daniel dropped the bombshell. "You work for your parents who didn't even finish high school? That's embarrassing, Emily," he said, his fork pausing midair. I choked on my water. "What? Why does that matter now?" Daniel shrugged, a look of disdain creeping onto his face. "I just thought you came from a more educated family. It's not a good look, associating with dropouts." I stared at him, my heart pounding. This was the man who'd vowed to love and respect me, the man who'd embraced my parents like his own. Yet here he was, sneering at their life's work. "But they've built a successful company, Daniel. They worked hard for everything we have," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. He scoffed. "Hard work? Please. They probably just got lucky. It's not like they had the brains to do something significant." The words stung like a slap. I looked across the table, at our son who was blissfully unaware, munching on his food. How could I explain to him one day that his father looked down on his grandparents? Daniel, they're my parents. You've known them for years. Why are you saying this now? My voice was a whisper, laced with disbelief and pain. He leaned back, his eyes cold. I guess I just never realized how limited their education was. It's not something to be proud of, Emily, and frankly, it reflects poorly on us. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The man sleeping beside me felt like a stranger. His words echoed in my mind, each syllable a sharp jab at my heart. My parents, who'd sacrificed everything to give me a life they never had, were now a source of shame for my husband. The Emily who had fallen in love with Daniel couldn't reconcile with this new reality. I closed my eyes, a single tear escaping. This was just the beginning, the first crack in the facade of our seemingly perfect life. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension and cold silences. Daniel's disdain for my family had seeped into every aspect of our lives. I watched as the man I married transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone who found pleasure in belittling others. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, Daniel walked in, his face stern. "Emily, we need to talk about your job," he began, his tone leaving no room for argument. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "What about my job, Daniel?" He leaned against the counter, his eyes cold. "I think it's time you considered quitting. Be a full-time housewife. It's not like your job at that rinky-dink company means anything." I clenched my fists, feeling a surge of anger. "My job means a lot to me, Daniel. My parents built that company from nothing. It's important." He laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Important? Please, Emily. It's a small-time operation. You'd be better off focusing on our home." I shook my head, disbelief and anger intertwining. "I won't quit my job, Daniel. It's part of who I am." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "Who you are. You're my wife, Emily. Your place is here, with our son, not wasting time at some dead-end job." I stared at him, the man I no longer recognized. "My parents' business isn't dead-end, and I am not just your wife, I am also a daughter and a professional." His laughter echoed in the kitchen. "Professional? That's a good one. You're playing at a job, Emily. Time to grow up and see what's really important." That night, I lay awake, the words and laughter haunting me. It was clear that Daniel's arrogance and contempt knew no bounds. His disregard for my identity, my family, and my aspirations was not just painful, it was suffocating. As the days turned into weeks, the idea of a life without Daniel started to grow in my mind. A life where I didn't have to defend my parents or my choices. A life where my son wouldn't hear his father mock his grandparents. But I knew that leaving Daniel wouldn't be enough. He needed to understand the pain he caused, to feel the sting of his own venom. I needed to stand up for my parents, for myself. The storm was rising, and I was ready to face it head-on. Daniel's promotion at work brought a new wave of arrogance that was unbearable. He strutted around the house like a peacock, his ego inflated to the point of bursting. One Saturday morning, as I was preparing breakfast, he sauntered into the kitchen with a smirk. "Guess who just got a big promotion? This means we're moving up in the world, Emily." I forced a smile, trying to keep the peace. "That's great, Daniel. Congratulations." He poured himself a coffee, his smirk widening. "With this raise, you really don't need to work anymore. You can finally quit that silly job of yours." I stiffened, my spoon clattering against the pan. "We've been over this, Daniel. I'm not quitting my job." He leaned against the counter, his gaze piercing. "You're still on about that? Emily, be reasonable. You won't have to lift a finger. I can provide everything." The condescension in his voice was like a slap. "It's not about the money, Daniel. I work because I love my job. It's part of who I am." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Love your job? That's just sentimental nonsense. You need to start thinking about what's best for our family." I turned off the stove, my hands trembling. "And what if I think working is what's best for me? For our family?" His eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish, Emily. You're not seeing the big picture. It's time you started acting like a proper wife and mother." The words hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about control, about Daniel dictating how I should live my life. I looked at him, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "And what if I don't want the life you're offering?" His expression darkened. "Is that a threat, Emily?" "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's a promise. I won't let you or anyone else dictate my life." The air between us was electric, charged with unspoken threats and shattered illusions. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. The man I married was gone, replaced by a stranger with whom I shared a house but not a life. As he left the room, the silence was deafening. But within me, a plan was forming. A plan to reclaim my life, to show Daniel he couldn't trample over me. The seeds of revenge were sown, watered by every condescending word and every dismissive gesture. It was time for Daniel to learn that underestimating me was his biggest mistake. The following weeks were a tense chess game with Daniel. His arrogance reached new heights, but I was busy laying the groundwork for what was to come. One day, I was called into an unexpected meeting at work. My father looked grave as he introduced me to Mr. Anderson, a project manager from a collaborating firm. "Emily, we have a serious issue," my father began, his voice heavy with concern. "It's about a project your husband is leading." My heart sank. "What about it?" Mr. Anderson cleared his throat, his expression grim. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Daniel has been manipulating the project for his gain." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "He's been diverting resources to another firm, and there are rumors of him being involved with someone from that company," Mr. Anderson said hesitantly. The room spun around me. "An affair?" The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "We can't confirm that," my father interjected, his face etched with worry. "But the evidence against him is quite damning." I sat there numb. The man I had married, the father of my child, was not only jeopardizing my family's business, but possibly having an affair. Rage bubbled inside me, a burning, seething cauldron of betrayal and hurt. "What do you plan to do?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "We need to gather more evidence," Mr. Anderson said, "but we need to be discreet. If Daniel realizes we're onto him, he might cover his tracks." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "I'll help. He won't suspect me." Over the next few days, I played the dutiful wife, while secretly gathering evidence with Mr. Anderson and my father. Each document I found, every covert conversation I overheard, was another piece in the puzzle of Daniel's deceit. But it wasn't just about the project anymore. I needed to know the truth about the alleged affair. If Daniel could betray my family's business, what else was he capable of? I hired a private investigator, my resolve steeling with every passing day. If Daniel was leading a double life, I would expose him for the fraud he was. The day the investigator handed me the envelope felt surreal. Inside were photos and messages that confirmed my worst fears. Daniel was indeed having an affair. Tears of anger and hurt blurred my vision as I looked at the pictures. But amidst the pain, there was clarity. Daniel had underestimated me for the last time. It was time for his house of cards to come tumbling down. Armed with the truth, my determination to bring Daniel down became unshakable. I met with Mr. Anderson and my father, our meeting charged with a sense of urgency. "We have enough to go public with his misconduct," Mr. Anderson said, his voice grim. "But we need to be strategic about this." I nodded, my mind racing with possibilities. "We can't just expose his professional misconduct. We need to reveal his personal betrayal as well. It has to be a complete takedown." My father looked at me, a mix of pride and concern in his eyes. "Emily, are you sure you want to do this? It's going to get ugly." I clenched my jaw, feeling a surge of resolve. He made it personal when he betrayed our family. I'm ready. Over the next few days, we meticulously planned our course of action. Mr. Anderson gathered the necessary evidence from the project, while I compiled the proof of Daniel's affair. The plan was to confront him at his company, where he could not escape the consequences of his actions. The day of reckoning came swiftly. Daniel left for work, unaware that his world was about to crumble. I arrived at his office with Mr. Anderson and my father, our faces set in determination. We confronted him in the conference room, the evidence laid out like a damning mosaic of his deceit. Daniel's face paled as he realized the extent of our knowledge. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" Daniel blustered, trying to regain his composure. "No joke, Daniel," I said, my voice steady. "We know everything. The sabotage of the project, the affair. All of it." He scoffed, trying to brush it off. "You have no proof." Mr. Anderson stepped forward, laying out the documents and photos. "We have all the proof we need. Your career is over, Daniel." Daniel's eyes darted around the room, desperation creeping into his expression. "You can't do this to me. I've worked too hard to get here." I looked at him, my heart void of any affection I once had. You should have thought of that before you betrayed us all. The meeting ended with Daniel being escorted out of the building, his career in tatters. As he passed me, his eyes met mine, a mixture of shock, anger, and defeat in his gaze. I didn't flinch. This was the price of his betrayal, a price he had to pay. As I left the building, the weight of the last few weeks began to lift. Daniel was out of my life, professionally and personally. It was time to rebuild, to focus on my son and my work. But above all, it was time to heal. The aftermath of Daniel's exposure was like a storm that swept through our lives, leaving a trail of revelations and consequences. His professional disgrace was just the beginning. A few days after the confrontation, I received a call from Daniel. His voice, once confident and arrogant, was now laced with desperation. "Emily, we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything," he pleaded. I held the phone tightly, my resolve unwavering. "There's nothing to explain, Daniel. I've seen the evidence. It's over. You can't do this to me. You're ruining my life." His voice rose in anger. "You did this to yourself," I replied, the bitter taste of betrayal still fresh. "You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences." He was silent for a moment, then his tone changed, becoming more sinister. "If you think you can get away with this, you're wrong. I won't let you destroy me." The threat hung in the air, but I wasn't intimidated. "I'm not afraid of you, Daniel. You've lost your power over me." I hung up, feeling a sense of empowerment. Daniel's threats were empty, the last gasps of a man who had lost everything. The news of Daniel's affair and professional misconduct spread, and the reactions were immediate. His social circles shunned him, and his professional network crumbled. The man who had prided himself on his image and status was now a pariah, his reputation in tatters. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce proceedings were straightforward, as Daniel had little ground to stand on. I was awarded full custody of our son and a significant portion of our shared assets. But it wasn't the financial settlement that gave me satisfaction. It was the knowledge that Daniel's downfall was of his own making. He had underestimated me, thinking he could control and belittle me without consequence. In the end, it was his arrogance that led to his undoing. He had sowed the seeds of his destruction, and I had merely helped them grow. As I closed this painful chapter of my life, I looked forward to a new beginning, a future where I was free from Daniel's shadow, free to be myself and provide a better life for my son. Daniel's fall from grace was a stark reminder of the price of betrayal and arrogance, a price he would continue to pay long after our paths had diverged. The finality of the divorce brought a mixture of relief and reflection. The house, once filled with tension and discord, now resonated with a quiet peace. My son and I adjusted to our new life, one where laughter began to replace the echoes of arguments. One afternoon, while sorting through old photographs, my son looked up at me, his eyes curious. "Mom, why don't we see Daddy anymore?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes people change, honey, and sometimes it's better to be apart than together." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and turned his attention back to the photos. In his simple acceptance, I found a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. The business thrived as I invested more of myself into it, my parents' legacy becoming a testament to resilience and hard work. The community rallied around us, their support a stark contrast to the isolation that Daniel now faced. Rumors reached me occasionally about Daniel's struggles. His career had stalled, his social circles had evaporated, and the woman he had an affair with had left him. It seemed that the life he had chosen was crumbling around him. I felt a sense of poetic justice in his downfall, but it didn't bring me joy. Instead, it served as a reminder of the cost of deceit and selfishness. My journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught me invaluable lessons. I learned the importance of standing up for myself, the strength in vulnerability, and the power of letting go. As I looked at my son, growing up so quickly, I knew that the most important lesson I could teach him was respect. Respect for others, for himself, and for the choices people make in life. Daniel had become a distant memory, a chapter closed and left behind. My focus was now on the future, on building a life filled with purpose and joy. In the end, the greatest revenge was not in seeing Daniel's destruction, but in my own reconstruction. In rising from the ashes of our broken marriage, I found a version of myself that was stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I had emerged from the storm, not unscathed but undefeated. And in that triumph, I found my peace.